One thing I speak a lot about on this channel is that those of us who hold moral, social and religious opinions which are divergent to the globalist liberal order will often be accused of being full of hate. Now, while you can always find a few examples of that sort of thing, mostly it's just a spin campaign to convince the average person that anything outside of the liberal paradigm is evil. They have images from Hollywood running through their minds of crazy people that they wouldn't want to associate with. That's why when you get supposedly edgy figures like Lawrence Fox, they are fundamentally still part of the liberal order. These people are sometimes referred to as classical liberals. I suppose Jordan Peterson would be another example. Konstantin Kisin is another more recent one who's boomed online. And yes, they make some very valid criticisms of modern day hyper-woke modernity, but in essence, they are still part of the liberal paradigm. Their solution seems to be to just go back to the 60s to 90s era, get beyond ideas of gender and differences, and have a blind approach to the world of fair competition in a neoliberal economic landscape. Of course, it would be nice if life was that simple, but the problem is that it was that worldview that was the stepping stone for the hyper-liberalism that we live under now. If we did follow through their ideas, essentially we'd just be stuck in a circular chain of history, and eventually we just return to the same wokeism. However, history is all about change. Things always change into new movements and new eras. The only things that are truly solid are truths that are transcendent. They were once held in religious and mythological structures, but we've decided that's all stupid fairy stories in modernity now. But you can sense that people like Fox do get that there's something missing in the modern world. I understand he's had a conversion to Christianity of his own quite recently, and that reflects in his politics. He's sort of half based, half with it, but half liberal at the same time. Fundamentally, his heart is still liberal. You can see this when he put this quote up recently, which is often misattributed to Nelson Mandela. Our world is not divided by race, colour, gender or religion. Our world is divided into wise people and fools divide themselves by race, colour, gender or religion. Now, this quote was met with quite some fanfare on Twitter, largely from the right to far right community. I'll get to that in a minute. But I think this quote sums up Lawrence Fox and his ideology perfectly. Yes, it's very consistent with spiritual reality and our Christian history, but it also fits perfectly into the modernist liberal paradigm. In a sense, Lawrence Fox is somewhat misguidedly channeling St. Paul here, who famously stated in Galatians, "There is neither Jew nor Greek, there is neither slave nor free, there is no male and female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus." The difference between someone like Lawrence Fox, a modern-day anti-woke liberal, and St. Paul, however, is St. Paul is very traditionalist and based. That's why left-wing Christians don't actually like him. He famously said that women shouldn't preach in church. He was very anti-homosexuality and any form of sexual immorality. In many ways, Paul encapsulated the heart of the Western tradition. Yes, that's a side of compassion, of love, of truth, and then on the flip side, a side of order, boundaries, structure, and hierarchy. It was that balance which held together the Western world and let it move forward, and this is where figures like Fox often get trapped in the modern era. What Fox is trying to do is what many liberals do, and that's take the divine element from Christianity, that there's a uniform equality and divine essence to us all, and imply it on the manifest physical level. Many modern liberal Christians try and make out this is Christianity, but it's actually a bastardization of Christianity, which is actually relatively recent in its history. It's incidentally exactly what the hard left try and do as well. The only difference is they deny any transcendence. They deny Christianity at root. After all, leftism comes from materialist atheism. So henceforth, the hard left will remove spiritual equality but try and imply all there is physical equality in the world. Then if you deny that, they will treat you as if it's sacrilege from the hangover from the spiritual truth which used to underpin the same idea. Incidentally, the counterexample is where the right historically have fallen apart. Yes, they will acknowledge that there are physical differences in the world. They can acknowledge natural hierarchy, but they tend to push away the natural spiritual unity which underpins a healthy society. Now, of course, I am oversimplifying here. There are many people who don't do this. It's just been a historic pitfall of the right, and one that the left still exploits to this day to demonize anybody who thinks outside of the liberal order. But in essence, the truth of our tradition is in each of these opinions and none of them. What it would really say is something like, yes, there is a divine reality working through all people. You could just call that life itself if you're secular. But that doesn't necessarily mean that that manifests on the physical realm. There are differences between men and women and groups for so forth. Now, as I often have to point out, that doesn't mean you hate different groups or different genders. It simply means you acknowledge reality as it is, and you look at it through the eyes of love to try and find the most compassionate, rational, and justifiable way of dealing with it. It was this simple truth which underlied the differences between men and women that we all knew till a decade ago. It also underlied the idea of nations and nationhood, even continents. This seems very controversial today, but spiritually it's perfectly normal. Even the Dalai Lama is fully up to date on this.
People from Afghanistan or the Middle East want to stay in Europe. Shouldn't they be allowed to?
Limited number, okay. But whole Europe eventually become Muslim country, impossible. Or African country, also impossible.
There's nothing wrong with that, is there? I mean, you're a refugee yourself.
They themselves, I think, better to their own land, climatically. Much better. Europe too cold.
My parents moved from India to the UK. That's now their home. That's okay too, isn't it? If Indians or anyone else wants to live in Europe?
I think England, the small island, 90% become Indian. Then I don't know.
Now that's a very fascinating clip because the Dalai Lama is not a man who's full of hate and evil. He's just simply a spiritual man who's looking at the world in peaceful eyes. However, the BBC journalist is absolutely flummoxed because it does not match with her metro-liberal worldview. But if we truly are to take on liberalism and come to a better tomorrow, this has to be the future of a post-liberal reality. In any such future world, we have to be able to acknowledge reality as it is outside of our utopian ideology. It's essential that we rhyme with the truths of life. That's completely consistent in our spiritual history. We must do so with compassion, reason and wisdom, not any sense of anger and hatred. This is the ultimate kryptonite to liberalism. That is the return of the divine tradition in the West. That is why they have to smear anybody who thinks outside of that paradigm, because they cannot let that in. It will destroy liberalism from its very core. This is why I often say we need to return to our divine tradition. It will do the work for us if we align with it. These are just my thoughts, however. Do let me know what you think down below, and do consider subscribing to the channel.